I'm Catherine Kingsley.
And I'm Catherine Stern.
And this is
Contemplating Culture,
a missionary walk through a secular age. Together we journey through A Secular Age by Charles Taylor, a book looking at the history and philosophy of how the world got where it is, and the impacts of our contemporary culture for us today as missionaries.
And we're inviting you to join the conversation.
Hello and welcome to Contemplating Culture.
Hello, everyone.
So welcome to today's episode. Today we've titled Deep Time in the Sublime, not just because of the rhyme, but because that's actually what we're talking about. We're talking about another sphere that opens up in the realm between belief and unbelief and everything in between when we move from the ordered Christendom through to the Enlightenment and things start to unravel over time. So the one we're talking about today is this sense that, I guess, the biblical narrative shines, he says it shines a shaft of light right back down through human history. So here in 2025, I can look to the biblical narrative and it tells me about all of human history from the very beginning. Human history is not a mystery to me in that sense. And not only that, but creation isn't a mystery. Creation is beautifully ordered by God and given to me to then till and order through my life and through human history. So it's this sense that time has this nice bound around it, and the physical has a nice boundary around it, and my existence has a given purpose.
A sense of safety and security, really, doesn't it? That sense of, I know who I am, I know where I am, and, everything's good.
I think that is why it was able to last for so long. But with the rise of science and this Enlightenment thinking of dismantling things and getting straight down to the facts, actually this timeline of the biblical narrative starts to get questioned, and particular facts about it start to get questioned. And we have the rise, as we were talking about, the idea that not only has the human person evolved over time, but the world has evolved over time. And suddenly, we don't know when the origin of human consciousness was. We don't know when human people started having souls and all of this kind of thing. And so he calls that the dark abyss, everything before what we know. And he says it's dark because it's mysterious, we can't really understand or fathom it, and it precedes the emergence of light. The emergence of light, I guess, being recorded human history. So in this dismantling, Taylor brings up three themes, I guess, of where this vastness starts to open up as the nice composed package of the biblical narrative starts to be dismantled. So the first of those is ruins and deep time.
So Taylor starts off talking about this, referencing Burnett, I think, who we talked about, I think, in the last podcast, and how Burnett talks about the mountains as the ruins of deep time. And what he's referring to is that as science progresses and we start to see something of and understand something of how the world has formed and reformed over very long periods of time, it wasn't like in the biblical narrative, that sense, God shaped the mountains with it and then they were there and they had a particular purpose and so on. But this idea of, the shifting of the continents and the creation of mountains by earthquakes and all sorts of things like that, that sense of time stretching back and the mountains being evidence, if you like, of this long period of time over which the world as we know it has evolved into what we know it to be. So Taylor gives us Burnett and launches then into this discussion of this idea of time as bigger and vaster than anything we could imagine. And really, if you look at the history of the science of things, perhaps you and I would connect to not the mountains, but the idea of the theory of the Big Bang, the looking at the galaxies and the thought about things being light years away as something that gives us that same feeling that Burnett's description of the mountains and Taylor's whole description of this wants to evoke, and that is that sense of being utterly insignificant within time that is so vast that we can't even get our heads around it. Like if I was a physicist, maybe I'd be able to tell you how long a light year is. As a child of the 20th, 21st century, I understand what a light year is, but it still blows my mind. And it blows my mind that we can think about time going back that far. This is what Taylor wants to get us in touch with is happening here. That instead of, the world being 6,000 years old and we can track, what happened when, etc., the science over this time starts to get us in touch with an uncertainty about how far back the world goes. Was there an actual beginning, or has it always been? And opens up questions which seem to, maybe do they contradict faith in the fact that God created the world? And at the very least, if they don't contradict faith, they contradict the secure story of the Bible. It opens up all sorts of possibilities for what I might believe or not believe about not just the world, but myself and my place in the world and my significance within the world and within time.
You're talking about how we might comprehend what a light year is. I think kids today just know that Lightyear is one of the Toy Story characters. But it has me thinking that when you are a kid and you first discover how many light years, away some of the planets are, and that's just in our solar system and everything's bigger, I guess there's a variety of responses to that. And this is what Taylor will be saying is that even though these are dismantling, in a sense, the biblical narrative of it being a factual account of human history, there's a range of responses. So you could look at this and be absolutely blown away by the magnitude and how big and wondrous God is. Or you could close in and make light of, like make comedy, make cartoon of how big it is. And somehow when you make something into a cartoon, it makes it easier for your brain to grasp. Or there's so many ways that we can respond to our sense of not being able to understand this thing being bigger than us.
It's true. And I guess one of the responses, and maybe it is a contributor, one of the responses would be that it contributes to my sense of anxiety or even kind of fear, if you like, to focus on this kind of thing because there's an insecurity that it introduces into my sense of the world and time and my place in it all.
I guess one of Taylor's points that he's making in this section as well is that with disenchantment and with the buffered self, I get to decide the implications of this for me, that I get to choose whether to engage with it or not. And he says there's something of the horror of all of this is almost delightful to contemplate because I have a sense of being buffered from it all.
It's true, but I think that the sense of being buffered only lasts to a certain extent. Like if I choose to then keep thinking about this stuff, I think my buffered sense falls away a little bit.
So that was Ruins and Deep Time, really looking at time not being as contained as we once thought it was, and there being something of time before we could understand that dark abyss before the light we know. So the next theme, I guess, that Taylor wants to talk about is the sublime, the sense of, in terms of physical space, the infinite. And it was like, I don't know, in the biblical narrative, nature is this ordered garden. But as that starts to be dismantled, there's actually, we start to see the expanse of the universe, the galaxies, the galaxies, the galaxies. And we look at our world, just Earth, and all of the wilderness and wildness and strangeness that we start to uncover in nature. And there's this sense that, firstly, we're very small in all of this. In terms of physical space, if you ever done that thing in primary school where it's like, this is how big you are on the earth, and this is how big the earth is compared to the sun, and this is how, like, this sense of like in physical space, I'm smaller and smaller. But something about the excess of nature, Taylor says, then has a capacity to break through our self-absorption. That this sense that existence is human-centered starts to be opposed by this sense of actually there's so much more than just not only just me, but more than humanity. And one of the responses, so we're talking about here lots of spheres that are opened up and the responses that can happen within this. So one of the responses that starts to happen in this sense of the infinite space is this dream of escaping into the wild. So I was saying before that there's a sense of safety, that it's almost like delightful to contemplate the wild now because I can choose when and how to engage with it. And when he first said that, I was thinking of this movie that one of the sisters loves and made me watch. And I was like, why would you make me watch that? Because I didn't think it had a great ending. It's a movie Into the Wild. So it's about a young guy who decides to make a break with society. So he kind of like burns all his money and cuts off his family connections, and off he goes into the Alaskan wilderness. And his purpose is to live in the wilderness, and he ends up dying in the wilderness. And a lot of people have gone on to try and replicate this because it's stirring something in the human heart of rejecting society. But actually, that's not what Taylor's talking about here. He's talking about the book turned into a movie, Wild, where this woman goes into the wild to discover herself so that she can come back into society and live a better life. And so, so many people have then gone on to replicate her life and gone into the wild to discover themselves and come back into society in order to live well. And it was really fascinating for me that I think both of these are responses to this sense of the wildness, that some people are going to be wanting to just reject all of society and just go off and be wild and live in that space. And some people are, no, I need to go to that space to encounter myself and then come back and live well. That it's this strange kind of thing that these and natural desires are emerging. And I guess we run a lot of retreats. So I guess one of the responses that this could look like is going on retreat, taking that time out to go into a lonely place as Jesus would do. But there's so many other, I guess, options in this scope of ways that this could look.
Yeah, I was thinking like there's a very similar sense in the sublime and just that sense of nature and the wildness, or not even the wildness, just sometimes the bigness of space that has the same effect as time, of the either awe and wonder of God or like giving me that sense of my significance. But then I was thinking also, like, I don't know about you, but the word wild is not used so much around me as nature, or we need to reconnect with nature, or isn't nature beautiful, or that sense of, and I was thinking about beauty or nature, creation, that sense of longing for a simpler life that's more connected to nature. And there's a whole movement for like fresh food and that connection with nature, if you like, the sense of it's better for us. It makes us more human. That's not even going deep within, it's just an exterior connection, but there's that sense of somehow nature and being closer to nature is good for me, is more
Yes.
natural for me, makes me a better person. But then also the beauty of nature and how beauty feeds us as human persons, and the importance of beauty, I think, somewhere in there as well.
And it's good. It ties really nicely into Taylor's third theme that he wants to open up, which he calls the dark genesis of humanity. And this is around I guess, our existence. And if we look at the theory or theories of evolution, that there's a mysterious origin of humanity within the universe. And actually, we have emerged in the same way that the things around us have. And this does two things. One is that I've got to look at the way nature is to understand myself because we've got a common evolution through time and space. And also, I realize that I'm not separate from, so the biblical narrative would say, humanity is very separate from creation because we're over it and to order it. But this sense that emerges is that actually I'm alongside it and I'm one I'm one with nature because we've got a common origin that's hidden in mystery. And we get a lot of then the ecological movements coming out of this.
And it's interesting, I think, because this whole, I guess, entry of the theory of evolution into our cosmic imaginary, if you like, is really quite huge, especially considering it's only a theory and they have not yet proved a link, if you like, to say that human beings were definitely descended from monkeys.
No, it's that we had a common ancestor.
It's true. But there's this sense of acceptance, if you like, of evolution that gives, I think, what you're saying, that sense of kinship with nature of, or however things happened, somehow we're part of it all. And there's a sense of like not just the ecological movement, but I was thinking even, at the animal rights movement, people who, I don't know about you, but I've recently seen signs on buses about milk companies that care about cows and calves, and there's a big controversy going on, I think it might be in New Zealand at the moment, about the dairy industry aborting calves to keep cows in milk, and like the shock and horror of that, or the shock and horror of chickens cooped up in cages to mass produce eggs or chicken. And this sense of like, who are we who have a common origin, a kinship, if you like, with the animals? We're not so different from them. Who are we to treat our fellow inhabitants of the earth like this?
And this question emerges of if humanity's origins are mysteriously mixed up with the rest of creation in a time and space that is beyond our capacity to know, it's in this dark abyss. What does it change about our sense of who we are now? And this is what we're looking at. There's so many implications for that. And one of the other ones that emerges in this space is just as our origins are shrouded in mystery, this sense of our beginnings have a depth to them that we can try and try and try and uncover, but we might not be able to. There's this whole psychological, psychiatric kind of movement with Freud that's then looking at our nature, our deep nature, that within the human person, we've been shrouded in mystery and we can dig deeper to find what's going on underneath there.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it is connected with the other in the sense that Freud and others, we're not so different from the animals. There's an animal nature in us which reasserts itself. How do you get in touch with, or how do you heal, or how do you work with that?
Well, we're talking about the different options that open up here, right? As we lose the security of that shaft of light of the biblical narrative, more and more spaces are opened up. I think you only got to look at psychology to see it. The range of new theories of how the human person works or how to do work with the inner the inner work of the human person, there's just more and more options. And then, like a new psychological method comes out, and then someone's trying to apply it in this way, and someone's trying to apply it in this way. And the Christians will take it and like, well, here's how we can Christianize it, like that there's ever more. And we talked about it many times, this supernova. And I think the psychological field is a great example of this supernova of just options of ways that we can do this work. But one of the things that makes me think of is, I guess, if this is part of the human longing, one of the ways that as Christians, we can move towards is looking at, I guess, some of the work of contemplation and prayer of the saints. And I was thinking of Teresa of Avila. She has this whole model of the interior castle, these seven mansions within the soul that one journeys through. Like we're talking about, well, what is in all the vast expanse, like where can you be safe? And in this model, it's like, well, no matter how far deep into yourself you go, at every point is going to be God, and at the final point is God. And I think that as people of faith, that's probably one of our places where we can stand, and we might talk about that in a minute, that we know that it doesn't matter how far back in time you go, how wide in space you go, there's this grounding principle, which is God.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that like one of the things Taylor identifies as happening through these movements is almost a removal of a sense of certainty, that with disenchantment and then with each of these things, the sense of certainty of who I am and how the world works disappears with the more and more and more options that come. And I guess there's a sense of then the possibility of even just standing before it all in overwhelm. I don't know where I stand in terms of such a vast expanse of time within such a vast expanse of space. And, even that sense of the depths of who I am, it just leaves me overwhelmed, uncertain. Who am I? Where do I stand? What's the purpose of my life? What should be the direction of my life? There's a real opening up, I think, within this of the supernova effect in terms of that sense of there is no one overarching understanding of these things that holds us together anymore.
Well, speaking of the supernova, Taylor wrote this book before Facebook. And so let's talk about what's happened since this book has been written, because Kat, you're convinced there's a new theme that we should be talking about.
Yeah, well, we were like, I was bringing it down to time, space, and human existence as these spaces within which all, I guess, scientific and technological advances have opened up this sense of supernova, uncertainty, overwhelm. And I was like, do you know what? There's also the dimension of the internet, the length and breadth of it. And sitting within that now, I would say a greater uncertainty of what does AI mean for all of this too? But even aside from AI, like this world of the online, which is not really like, it's not quite time or space or existence, it's its own thing.
Yeah.
But it's another space within which there's a potential to stand before it all, and particularly when you add in this new dimension of AI, of uncertainty. What's this thing that we've created that is bigger than any one of us, that has a very uncertain potential? What does it mean for who I am? And particularly AI, what does that mean for the human person? What does that mean for my future? What does that mean even for little things like jobs? Well, that's not little in most people's lives.
Well, we have in the Bible a great example of, I guess, the call of the person of faith to respond to the bigness, the giants that we face.
Yeah, it's true. I was thinking about this and thinking of the story of David and Goliath. So in the Old Testament, in the book of Samuel, there's the story of David and Goliath. And David's this historical king of Israel, but in these days he's just a shepherd boy. And the Israelites are fighting the Philistines, and the Philistines send forth this giant as their champion who offers to fight anyone Israel puts forward as a way of solving this war. You send forth a champion, I'll fight him, and whoever wins the war. And the people of Israel are looking at this 7-foot guy who's built to match, and he's wearing armor of bronze, and he just looks unassailable. And they're quaking in fear. And David's this shepherd boy who's just been sent by dad with lunch for his brothers who are in the army. And he sees this and hears this and watches everyone quaking with fear around him and goes, why are you all so afraid? I'll fight him. Nobody really takes him seriously. The king says, well, if you're determined, you can. I'll give you some armor. That might make you safer. He tries the armor on, can't fit it. It's too heavy. So he takes it off and he stands before this giant and he says, like, you come before me, essentially in human strength, but I come in the name of the Lord. And just that sense of security and safety that comes out of his relationship with God, that he can face down what seasoned soldiers were terrified of, because he knew who was on his side, who was with him, that it wasn't all about him and his size or power, but ultimately he had God, and that was the thing that was necessary. I think there's something about that for us, and that for me sums up where I stand in all of this, of like, before all of these things, there's a sense of I stand in a place of safety and security because of my relationship with God. I don't have answers to these things. I agree, they're scary, but I can face the fear in the safety of a relationship with a God who's bigger than all this.
And I guess one of the things Taylor talks about in this whole part of the chapter is that the chasm between belief and unbelief is huge. And he says some interesting things, like he calls it no man's land. He also says that sometimes it's so hard work, like the distance is so big that there's this almost exhaustion between the believers and unbelievers fighting because there's so much space between. Yeah, two things I like to talk about is, I guess, what's our response as people of faith for ourselves? And there's this huge gaping hole of no man's land of where there's this huge range of options. The reason that we want to keep doing this podcast is to keep fit. I mean, obviously, I'd love to get to the end of the book. That's the ultimate goal. But beyond that, and probably more important than that, is for us to keep asking the question of what's the missionary response into this space. So let's start with us in the space of ever expanding time, space, existence, and the internet. What's it like for you, Kat?
Well, I think I kind of gave that away already, of that sense of real safety. I was saying when we were chatting about this before, I have this memory of being in year 9 and talking about creation and evolution and having this sudden realization that for me, it wasn't really important whether God created the world in 6 days or 6 billion or trillion years. Point was that God created the world, and I was quite secure within that, and therefore felt safe to explore what scientists were saying, what other people thought, that kind of thing. It was a space of real non-defensiveness. I was thinking about that safety, and really that it came ultimately out of a security and relationship with God, and knowing this is who he is and this is what he's like. And some of the details then really don't concern me about how he created the world. And I was thinking about the famous conversation between Jesus and St. Catherine of Siena, where he says, you only need to understand two things. The first is that I am the one who is, and the other is that you are the one who is not. And just that sense that even built into our whole Christian spiritual tradition is that understanding of our own insignificance in the scheme of things. And that maybe when you know God, who is the significant one, and know yourself as insignificant in relation to him, but deeply loved by him despite that insignificance, and that really comes out through Catherine of Siena's writings. She's like, who are we that you would chase after us and care about our salvation and want to spend eternity with us? Like, you must be madly in love with us. It can make no other sense of it.
Yeah.
Out of that space, I can then look at my insignificance in space and time and in the face of the internet, and it doesn't add or subtract anything because I already know my own insignificance and I feel secure there. and it gives me a capacity to sit comfortably with mystery.
Yeah. And I guess the thing I'm hearing is that there's a lack of defensiveness. Your faith is not dependent on the accuracy of the biblical narrative in terms of space and time, because God's not going to be opposed to science. He created it. So whatever science ends up discovering, it's not going to impact the faith that you hold.
Absolutely. And on the converse, I'm quite comfortable sitting with someone who firmly believes in a 6-day creation as well. Because whether or not God chose to create the world in 6 days, like I'm sure he's capable of it if that's what he wanted to do. And if they one day proved that was correct, that also wouldn't shake my world. So it gives me a capacity, like Taylor talks about the no man's land, that space between belief and unbelief. What I think this security does is it gives me a capacity to wander around in that no man's land, feeling relatively secure, and therefore meeting other people in that no man's land. I guess that's where I would come to see the missionary, not challenge, but missionary opportunity maybe of this whole space.
And I think the image you gave of David is a great one here because I can visualize that really clearly. The
Mm,
space between the Israelites who believed in God but were afraid, and the, I guess, unbelief, if you want to class it as that, of the giants sitting on the other side. But because of the security David has, he can walk into that space in the middle
mm.
and he's not stuck. He can have the courage to move because he has that relationship with God.
And I think Charles Taylor doesn't name it in this chapter, but it's very clear, it comes out of the whole of the book and his writings, is that in this generation there are more seekers, more people who live in no man's land who live in either of the camps of belief and unbelief on either side. And if we who live in the camp of belief in some ways are able to sit in this non-defensive space, then we're able to go and meet the seekers in the place where they are. Because one of the things about seekers is that they're not like sitting in a camp, they're open. Taylor, I think, calls them natural ecumenicals because they're not defensive over a particular stance. They're open and searching for answers. So if we're able to be comfortable looking at all the different things that people are thinking and saying because we're secure in a relationship with God, it puts us in a place where we're much more able to go and meet and walk with others who are searching, who haven't found a home yet in faith.
So I guess in terms of the what does it mean for us? Like what's the significance of this for us as missionaries? I love going back to that image of the marketplace because it just makes so much sense to me. I think there's two things from what you're saying. It's kind of like you don't even have to be at the stall, just be walking around the marketplace and be open to interactions. That's part of the missionary call, to not even be stuck at the stall, but just be walking around as a fellow person and not being afraid of the kinds of people you might encounter, the other stalls you might encounter, and being able to engage with people wherever they're at.
Mm,
The second thing is in our youth ministries, particularly our young adults ministries at the moment, we are having this explosion, absolute explosion of young people that are having encounters with God separate to anything particularly attached to faith. That we have young people just calling up parishes saying, I want to become Catholic. For those of us who are in ministries or parishes, there's kind of like a need more than ever to be well formed when we're at the stall
mm,
because the people coming in have already had something. So then our job of evangelization becomes holding them well. Oh, I wasn't expecting you. Like, do
mm,
you know what I mean? It's almost like it's surprising me, I'll be honest. I wasn't expecting whatever it is that God's doing right now.
mm,
I wasn't expecting that he would be just reaching people totally separate to any of our missionary efforts, it would seem. But then he's bringing them into our ministries, bringing them into our parishes. And it's a whole new kind of Christian, I
Mm.
think, that we're seeing on account of this because they haven't grown up in faith and they've found it for themselves. They've kind of read themselves into it, or God's broken into their lives in some way. And so, yeah, there's a fire there that is so different. It's the same fire, but it's different. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think what I'm hearing is that whether or not your role takes you predominantly out into no man's land, out into the market to wander around and encounter people where they're at, or whether or not you're sitting at the stall and encountering the people who come to the stall, there's something really important about being non-defensive, about being so grounded in your own faith and relationship with God that you are able to wander in terms of thought with people and meet people where they're at, not to correct them and tell them whether they're going wrong, but actually to explore with them and, yes, present faith, but like almost allowing them or helping them to find it, rather than maybe the old imagery of catechizing them by correcting them and telling them what's right and wrong,
Yeah.
but by, like, exploring with them down this avenue and helping them see why that doesn't fit with what we believe as Catholics, or doesn't fit with this view of the universe, or whatever it is.
And I think it was great. It was great. I think maybe a great place to end for today is to just know the theme for our Jubilee year. So the Catholic Church is in a Jubilee year this year, and the theme is Pilgrims of Hope. That the vastness of no man's land, I think, and the amount of people that are traveling should give us hope. And we should be pilgrims of hope, I think, into that space. That whatever you're feeling in the midst of what's happening in the world at the moment, there is hope because above it all, beyond it all, before it all, after it all is God.
And God is what gives us our anchor, our sense of who we are within that potentially overwhelming space and time and existence.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great spot to land today. So thanks, Kat, for the conversation. Thanks for those listening. And until next time, be well.
See you later, everyone.
This has been Contemplating Culture, a podcast produced by the Missionaries of God's Love Sisters. For more information from today's episode, be sure to check out the show notes. We pray that today has blessed you, and most importantly, we invite you to continue the conversation.